Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, so a secret 28-point peace plan to end the war in Ukraine has just popped up on the world stage, and it is already causing a major stir. Today we're going to break down what's actually in this controversial proposal and figure out why it's sparking so much intense debate.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First up, we'll get into the proposal itself. What is this thing? Then we'll dive deep into the really tough part, the so-called painful concessions Ukraine would have to make. After that, we'll look at what the other big players, like Russia and the US, get out of this deal. We'll cover the global reaction, and trust me, it's a mixed bag. And we'll wrap up by asking the million-dollar question. Is there any chance this could actually lead to peace?
All right, let's get right into it. So what we have here is this incredibly detailed 28-point framework. Now, the story goes that it was secretly drafted by US and Russian officials, and apparently it even has the backing of the US president. The goal? To end the war. But this isn't just some small suggestion. It's a huge, sweeping proposal that seems to have caught a lot of people, including some really important allies, completely off guard.
But here's where the story starts to get, well, a little messy. Right from the get-go, we're hearing two completely different things. Washington hasn't made a big formal announcement, but they're not denying it. Meanwhile, Moscow is just flat out saying, nope, doesn't exist. They deny any of this is happening. The one person who's confirmed it? Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He says he's seen the draft, and you can tell he's not exactly thrilled.
And really, President Zelensky himself kind of set the whole tone for this. He used just two words to describe what's in this plan: painful concessions. I mean, that says a lot, right? Even though he's saying he'll evaluate it carefully and not make any rash statements, that phrase, it hangs in the air. It tells you pretty much everything you need to know about how tough these terms are.
So, what exactly are these painful concessions? What makes them so difficult? Well, let's dig in, because the demands in this plan, they strike right at the core of everything Ukraine has been fighting for: its land, its right to choose its own future, and its ability to defend itself.
Basically, you can break it all down into three big buckets: territory, sovereignty, and military power. And look, each one of these is a huge deal. We're talking about a complete reversal of Kyiv's public stance and the very principles they've shed so much blood to protect.
Okay, first up, and this is probably the biggest pill to swallow, territory. The plan would require Ukraine to officially recognize Russian control over Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk. But it doesn't stop there. It also says they have to freeze the current front lines in places like Kherson and Zaporizhia. I mean, that effectively means handing over control of those areas too. It's a massive territorial loss.
Next on the list, the plan takes aim at Ukraine's sovereignty, specifically its dream of joining NATO. This isn't just a suggestion to hold off for a while. It would require Ukraine to abandon that goal forever and actually write that promise into its own constitution. That's a huge deal for their future security.
And the third major concession? It's about military power. Ukraine's armed forces would be capped at 600,000 personnel. Now, to put that in perspective, their military has grown to be one of the biggest and most battle-hardened in Europe. So this puts a really strict limit on their ability to defend themselves down the road. Okay, so of course, a deal this massive isn't a one-way street. It has to be a bargain, right? If Ukraine is being asked to make such, well, painful concessions, you have to ask, what's in it for Russia and the US?
And when you look at the details, it becomes really clear just how transactional this whole thing is. For Russia, the benefits are pretty obvious. They'd get international recognition for the territory they've seized, sanctions would be lifted, and they'd even be brought back into the G8. Basically, an end to their global isolation. And for the United States, well, sure, there's the big prize of de-escalating a conflict with a nuclear power, but there's also a pretty significant financial angle here too.
Yeah. A huge part of the money side of things revolves around all those frozen Russian assets. The plan suggests that a chunk of that money, about $100 billion, would go toward rebuilding Ukraine. But the rest? It would be funneled into a brand new joint investment fund between the US and Russia.
And this is probably the most controversial financial part of the whole deal. The plan says that $100 billion of those frozen Russian assets would go to Ukraine's reconstruction. But the United States would get to lead that reconstruction, and in return, it would pocket 50%, half of all the profits from that massive venture. So you look at all this, and it just begs the question, is a deal this sweeping, with such huge gains for some, and such massive sacrifices for others, even possible? Could it actually happen? Well, the initial reactions from around the world are starting to paint a pretty clear picture.
Yeah, the global reaction came fast, and it's been a mix of deep skepticism and some serious diplomatic friction.
I mean, like we touched on before, the two main players outside of Ukraine are telling completely different stories. You have the White House press secretary confirming the president supports the plan. Then you have the Kremlin spokesperson saying, nope, no formal peace talks are happening. It just created a ton of confusion right out of the gate.
And it's not just what's in the plan that's causing alarm, it's the secrecy around it. This quote from a European diplomat really says it all. We only became aware of the plan when we turned on the news. Can you imagine? Key European allies whose security is directly on the line were apparently kept completely in the dark.
And you see a real split in the reactions from everyone else. Ukraine's UN envoy didn't mince words, calling it an absurd surrender demand. France is saying peace can't mean capitulation. But then you have someone like Hungary's prime minister, who's actually backing the plan and saying it has new momentum. So a complete chorus of different opinions here. And look, beyond all the political drama, there are some massive legal hurdles. Take point 26, for example. It proposes a full amnesty for everyone's actions during the war. Legal experts are looking at this and saying it's a complete non-starter. You can't just ignore international law and pretend active arrest warrants from the International Criminal Court don't exist.
So, when you add it all up, the controversy, the skepticism, the outright opposition, where does that leave us? Is there any real path to peace here?
At the end of the day, what this proposal really does is lay out a brutal choice for Ukraine. On one hand, a potential end to this horrific war, but on the other hand, it means sacrificing the very principles of territory and sovereignty that they have fought and died for. It crosses so many of their red lines.
And security experts are not holding back. Listen to this from Keir Giles at Chatham House, a really influential think tank. He called the terms unenforceable, nonsensical, and vague. But then he said this, that it's basically the U.S. endorsing the seizure of territory through open arms aggression. That's a pretty damning assessment.
And that really leaves us with the big final question. What should you take away from all this? Is this controversial plan a realistic, if incredibly difficult blueprint for peace? Or is it just a demand for surrender dressed up in diplomatic language? The answer to that question isn't just about Ukraine. It could very well define the future of European security.